Everyone has felt it. That sudden, burning awareness that your hands don't know where to rest, your smile feels rehearsed, and your body has betrayed you in public. The fear of looking awkward has quietly controlled more lives than failure ever has. This story will expose that anxiety in raw, honest detail, and by the end, you may never see yourself the same way again. If stories that hit uncomfortably close to home matter to you, subscribe now, because this one is for anyone who has ever felt painfully seen. He first noticed it when he was 9 years old, standing in a school assembly hall that smelled faintly of dust and floor cleaner. Everyone else seemed to know exactly how to stand, feet planted, arms relaxed, faces calm. He, on the other hand, became suddenly hyper-aware of his own existence. Were his shoulders too stiff? Were his arms dangling strangely? Why did his hands feel enormous and foreign? He clasped them together, then immediately worried that clasping them looked strange. He released them, then panicked that letting them hang made him look careless. In that moment, a quiet fear was born. The fear of being seen doing nothing wrong and still being judged. As he grew older, the anxiety evolved. It no longer announced itself loudly. It whispered. It whispered in classrooms when he raised his hand and worried about how his voice would sound. It whispered at weddings when he walked across the hall, convinced that every step was being evaluated. It whispered at bus stops, cafes, offices, and family gatherings. The fear was never about making a mistake. It was about existing incorrectly. About being slightly off, slightly unnatural, slightly embarrassing. And the worst part was that no one else seemed to struggle with this. Everyone else looked effortless, as if they had received a manual he somehow missed. By the time he reached adulthood, the anxiety had become sophisticated. It no longer screamed panic. It disguised itself as self-awareness, politeness, and humility. He told himself he was just observant, just thoughtful, just careful. But beneath that surface was constant monitoring. He monitored his facial expressions in conversations, adjusting them like sliders on a screen. He monitored how long he held eye contact, terrified of holding it too long or breaking it too early. He monitored his laughter, ensuring it was neither too loud nor too quiet. Even silence felt dangerous. Silence made him feel exposed, as if others could see straight through him and discover that he didn't quite belong. Social situations became performances. Before entering a room, his mind rehearsed dozens of scenarios. Where would he stand? Who would he talk to first? How would he exit conversations without seeming rude? He imagined invisible spotlights following him, highlighting every small movement. If someone glanced in his direction, his heart jumped. If someone laughed nearby, he assumed it was about him, even when logic told him otherwise. Logic was rarely invited to these moments. Anxiety did not care about logic. Anxiety cared about survival, and survival meant blending in perfectly. Ironically, the harder he tried to appear natural, the more unnatural he felt. He became stiff, cautious, restrained. He smiled when unsure, nodded when confused, laughed when anxious. He agreed too often. He apologized unnecessarily. He said, "Sorry," when someone bumped into him. Every interaction felt like walking on a narrow bridge where one wrong step could send him tumbling into humiliation. And humiliation, in his mind, was worse than pain. Pain faded. Humiliation stayed, replaying itself endlessly in memory. There were moments that haunted him. A time when he waved back at someone who wasn't waving at him. A moment when he said, "You too," after a waiter said, "Enjoy your meal." A handshake that turned into an awkward half-hug because neither person committed fully. These moments seemed small, forgettable, insignificant to anyone else. But to him, they were evidence. Evidence that he was socially defective. Evidence that he didn't know the rules. Evidence that he was always one step behind everyone else. What made it worse was the illusion that everyone else was relaxed. He watched people slouch comfortably in chairs, speak freely without overthinking every word, move their bodies without calculating how it looked. He assumed confidence was something people were born with, like eye color or height. He believed that confident people never thought about how they appeared, never felt awkward, never replayed conversations at night. He did not realize that many of them were simply better at hiding it, or that they, too, were fighting their own invisible battles. The anxiety followed him into professional life. Meetings became psychological minefields. He worried about how he sat at the table, how often he spoke, whether his contributions sounded intelligent or forced. When he did speak, his heart raced, and he barely heard his own words, too focused on how they were being received. After meetings, he replayed everything. The pauses, the tone, the expressions on others' faces. One raised eyebrow could fuel days of self-doubt. One neutral response could feel like rejection. Romantic situations were even worse. Dating amplified every fear. He worried about how he walked next to someone, how fast he texted back, how long he waited before replying. He analyzed his posture, his gestures, his laugh. He feared saying the wrong thing, but he feared silence even more. The idea that someone might see him as awkward felt unbearable. Not because awkwardness was unforgivable, but because he believed it revealed something deeply flawed about him. Something unlovable. The cruel irony was that his fear of looking awkward often made him appear distant or reserved, which others misinterpreted as disinterest or arrogance. He wanted connection, but anxiety built walls around him. He wanted to be seen, but only if he could control exactly how he was seen. Over time, he learned to avoid situations that triggered the fear. Parties, public speaking, networking events, even casual hangouts. Avoidance felt like relief in the short term, but slowly, it shrank his world. There were nights when he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments that had happened years ago. His mind treated memories like open wounds, probing them repeatedly. He asked himself endless questions. Why did I say that? Why didn't I just act normal? Why can't I be like everyone else? The word, normal, became a weapon he used against himself, even though no one had ever defined what normal truly meant. The turning point did not arrive as a dramatic breakthrough. It arrived quietly, almost accidentally. One evening, he noticed someone else at a gathering, a person standing alone, shifting their weight, checking their phone, clearly uncomfortable. For the first time, instead of judging, he felt compassion. He didn't think, how awkward. He thought, they look nervous. I hope they're okay. That thought lingered. It unsettled him, because it contradicted everything he believed about how others saw him. He began to observe more carefully. Not with the hypercritical eye of anxiety, but with curiosity. He noticed that confident-looking people fidgeted too. They misspoke. They told stories that fell flat. They stood awkwardly at times. The difference was not that they never looked awkward, it was that they didn't punish themselves for it. They moved on. They allowed themselves to be human. Slowly, painfully, he experimented with imperfection. He let a silence exist without filling it. He allowed himself to say something slightly strange without immediately apologizing. He noticed that the world did not collapse. People did not recoil. In fact, some seemed more relaxed around him. Vulnerability, he realized, was not weakness, it was permission. Permission for others to stop performing too. The anxiety did not disappear. It still visits him. It still whispers when he enters a room or meets someone new. But now, he recognizes it. He no longer confuses it with truth. He understands that looking awkward is not a failure, it is evidence of being alive, of trying, of caring. He understands that the people who matter are not keeping score of his micro-movements. And those who judge harshly are often fighting their own fears. He learned that confidence is not the absence of awkwardness, but the willingness to carry it without shame. That authenticity often looks messy. That grace is not about moving perfectly through the world, but about forgiving yourself when you stumble. And most importantly, he learned that the fear of looking awkward had stolen far more from him than awkwardness ever could. In letting go, just a little, he gained something precious. Freedom. Freedom to exist without constant self-surveillance. Freedom to take up space imperfectly. Freedom to be seen as he is, not as a carefully edited version designed to avoid judgment. The anxiety still knocks, but it no longer controls the door. And in that freedom, he finally discovered something he had been searching for all along: peace with being human. If this story resonated with you, don't ignore that feeling. Anxiety thrives in silence, but healing begins when we face it together. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment with your own experience, because you're not alone, even when it feels like you are. And subscribe now for more stories that confront the fears we rarely talk about, but all secretly carry.